Good. Okay. Isser Hana. Before that was the public policy discussion. Okay. Let's talk about the Isser Hana and Basar B'chalav. Let's start with the sources, right? So we have actually the most significant source is Rabbi Avo, okay, on Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Bet. So Amar Rav Ashi, Minayin Basar B'chalav she'asur ba'achila. So we have Shenema lo tochal kol toiva, kol shetiafti l'cha harehu beval tochal. Ve'ein le'ela ba'achila bahana minayin. Kid Rabbi Avo, the Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Lazar, kol makom shene'emar lo yochal, lo tochal, lo tochlu, echad isur achila ve'echad isur hanaa b'mashma. Ad shifrot l'cha katuv, kederach shepiret l'cha b'nevela, lager b'netina lo v'kochavim b'mechira. So that means, anytime the Torah says, use the verb lo tochal, so it includes Isser Hana, unless there's an exclusionary cause. When it says, Lager asher b'sharecha titnena v'achala, or lekelev tashluchonoto, so that tells you that it's mutter b'hana. Okay, you know that by Nevel and Treifa, but by Basar B'chalav it's Asur b'achila, so anything that's Asur b'achila is Asur b'hana. I'm fudging it a little bit. Because it says here, Kamakom shene'emar, right? Lo tochal, lo yochal, lo tochal. It doesn't say lo tochal, lo yochal in Basar B'chalav, right? So, at least Rabbi Avo, if you apply Rabbi Avo to this, because Rabbi Avo didn't say this about Basar B'chalav necessarily, but it's applied for Basar B'chalav. So then what that means is anything that's Asur b'achila is Asur b'hana. But what Rabbi Avo is saying more specifically is anytime the Torah formulates a prohibition with the language of Achila, that includes Hana. It's not the same thing. Okay? And we'll see how it depends on how we understand Basar B'chalav. Okay? What I think, just broadly speaking, when you talk about Achila, so there's really two ways of translating the word Achila. When you talk about, let's say, Achilat HaMizbeach, or ki Hashem Elokecha eish ochlahu, right? It doesn't mean it's a fire that eats. It's a fire that consumes. It's a different word, right? And when we talk about achilat hamizbeach, unless you go back to the original myths that we talked about in the beginning of the year, that it really is la'achil, to give food to God, right? Symbolically. But in Pshat, I think the word achila has two connotations. It means eating, and it also means consuming. So maybe what Rabbi Avo is saying is this isn't just a technical limud, that when what does achila mean when the Torah says achila? Do you translate as eating, or do you translate that to mean consuming? And consuming, when you get hana from something, you're also consuming it. You're not eating it, but you're consuming it. Okay? So maybe that's what Rabbi Avo is saying. And then, of course, the question is, does it have to say that beferish in the Torah with regard to the specific prohibition? Or anything that's usher to eat, generally speaking, we assume also has an isser hana attached to it, because things that are usher to eat are really fundamentally usher to consume, and eating is the primary way of consuming. And that's why we use the language of eating, but we mean consuming. Okay? All right, so that's Rabbi Avo.
Then there are very few things that actually are asur b'hana.
But there are, right? Oral is asur b'hana. But no, avodah zara is right. Avodah zara is asur b'hana. Kadshim, we'll talk about the isur me'ilah is isur hana, right? That's what the Rambam was going to talk about. Okay, right? Chametz b'Pesach is asur b'hana. Okay, so that's one. Then we have on Kuf Tet Vav Amud Bet. Let's see 1 second. Of course, we have what's it? Lo Tov Hashel Gedi 3 times, and one of them is Isur Hana, and that's on Kuf Tet Vav Amud Aleph. And we have Isi Ben Yehuda has a Kal Vachomer. Isi Ben Yehuda Omer Minayin LeBasar B'Chalav She'asur B'Chlal שנאמר, כאן כי עם קדוש אתה, נאמר לנו, ואנשי קודש תהיו לי, בשר בשדה בטריפה לא תאכלו. מה לנו אסור, אף כאן אסור. That's איסור אכילה. ואין לי אלא באכילה, בהנאה מנהלן. אמרת קל וחומר, ומה עורלה שלא נבדה בעבירה, אסורה בהנאה, בשר בחלב שנבדה בו עבירה, אינו דין שאסור בהנאה. And then the rest of the Gemara kicks around that kal v'chomer. Okay? That's another possibility. It's a kal v'chomer me'orla. And finally, we have an opinion that, in fact, basar b'chalav is not asur b'hana min haTorah. Okay? And that's Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. When the Gemara says, "Nitin delo ki haytana the Tanya." Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda omer, mishum Rabbi Shimon basar b'chalav asur b'achila umutar b'hanaa shenemar ki am kadosh ata. ונאמר להלן ואנשי קודש תהיון לי. מה להלן אסור באכילה ומותר בהנאה, referring to treifa. אף כאן אסור באכילה ומותר בהנאה. Okay? Fine. So we have a number of different possibilities. Either it's somehow related to the Isur Achila, which is Rabbi Avo, or it may be derived separately. That's what comes out of Rabbi Yishmael. Like lo tevashel 3 times means there's a separate limud for Isser Hana, which is distinct, which is separate from the Isser Achila. Right? Those, it seems to break down that way, right? Actually, there's another source here which there's another source here which I missed. Rebbe Bahanami Nalan. It's in the middle of Kuf Tet Vav Mid Aleph. Nafkale mehacha ne'mar kan ki am kadosh ata la'Hashem. Referring in the parsha Basar B'chalav. V'ne'amar la'alan lo yeh kadesh b'vnei Yisrael. Isser bia. Right? Ma la'alan b'hana'ah af kan b'hana'ah. That's very interesting. Right? We talked about that in the beginning of the year, right? We talked about the nature of ma'achalot asurot in general, and the comparison. Let's go back, okay? The Gemara says in Masechet Kritut on Daf Yud Tet, "Mit'asek b'chalavim va'arayot chayav shekein neheneh." So the Gemara makes this comparison between chalavim and arayot. In other words, ma'achalot asurot and biot asurot. And it says that you're chayav in both of them, even if you're mitasek. That's the point. Even in davar she'eino mitkavein, shekein neheneh. And there, and this is just a little bit of chazar for you. This is mamish, I think, the first meeting that we had, and we said that there are 2 ways of understanding that statement. Why mitasek b'chalavim v'arayot chayav shekein neheneh? One is that if you don't have kavanah, there's no connection between you and the action. What makes it you that does the action? It should be your intention. Otherwise, physically, there's you and there's your body. Right? Your body did it, but you didn't do it as a legal entity. In brisket terminology, you would say your chefza did it, your gavra didn't do it. Right? And what makes your gavra do it, what makes it connected to you legally, whatever you is, right? Your identity is the fact that you have intention. Right? So if you don't have intention, so that's why you're patur. So what does Hana do? Hana is a connection which is in the place of intention, right? Since you got Hana, that's as if you intended, right? That's interesting for the, I guess, Joel, a legal question, so it's actually related to that, right? So that's one way. But the other way, which is relevant for what we're saying here, is that the tzad shaveh between machalot asurot and biot asurot is what's really asur is the Hana, as opposed to the action. So then it's very interesting that how do we know basar b'chalav is asur b'hana? This is actually kodesh tiyun li basar and then there's the isur basar b'chalav and the isur bia, right? Lo yeh kadesh b'bnei Yisrael, kadesh u'kdesham b'bnei Yisrael. So that ties together what's asur in bia and what's asur in achila. Maybe the sodo shel davar is the same yisod, which is an isur hana. Ties and brings us back to that. Okay. Now, what I'm getting at, I think that just like when you talk about the Isser Achila and the Isser Bishul, you have 2 distinct Isurim and you want to know what the relationship between them is. So same question, you can ask, and it needs to be asked when you talk about the Isur Hana and the Isur Achila, what is the relationship between them? So here, in other words, how would I formulate it? Would I say that Hana, you could say, is sort of a less intense type of Achila? There's this spectrum of deriving benefit from some object, which the Torah doesn't want you to have benefit from. So the least amount of benefit would be what you would call Hana, but the most benefit you can get from a piece of basar b'chalav is actually to eat it. But it's all one Isser really, but different gradations. So that's how you could come on to the idea that, for example, the Rambam says that even though Isser Hana is min HaTorah, there's no malchus on the Hana. Okay? We'll see. Because the Rambam holds that really the Isser Hana and the Isser Achila are the same. One is just an extension of the other. So then you're only getting malchus when you're over the Isser in its highest form. Okay? You could maybe look at it as sort of a Chatzi Shir, if you want. And that goes back to when we talked about Chatzi Shir, that a qualitative pachot mikashir. Okay? So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, no, they're two separate things. You can't eat it. That's one distinct action that you can't do. And the other thing that you can't do is you can't derive benefit from it, and they're two separate isur. So obviously, if you go back to the sources that have it as a separate derivation, we'll say that they're two separate things, and they can have, and we'll see what the nafkamins might be. And the sources, certainly Rabbi Avo, who says anytime it says lo tochal, it includes Isser Hana. So it means that the Isser Achil and Isser Hana, they're really the same Isser, but one is more intense than the other. Okay? Okay, so let's take a look. There's some one question that came up. Actually, here Achronim do most of the work. There isn't that much on this in Rishonim, except for that Rambam, which we'll see later. Let's see in the Pischei Tshuva in Pei Zayin, Ot Bet, right? When the Mechaber says that it says three times in the Torah, right? Ve'echad le'isur achila ve'echad le'isur hana. So he says, first of all, v'I hayaloke el hana data Rambam de'enu loke v'shar poskim sovim de'loke. Okay, but that's what's the nafkamina of Zman Hazeh. So he has some nafkamina for the Zman Hazeh. Okay? Vayein. One question. Be prima gadim shenistapeki aser chatzi shir bebishul v'hana min haTorah. Okay? So if you look at, so two ways of taking apart this question. One way is looking at the nature of the Isser of Chatzi Shir. So that I don't want to talk about. But the other way of taking apart the question is to look at the nature of the Isser Hana. If the Isser Hana is an extension of the Isser Achila, so if there's a Chatzi Shir in Isser Achila, there's a Chatzi Shir in Isser Hana. Okay? What the Shir is, okay, is an interesting question. What is the Shir of the Isser Hana? Is there a Shir of the Isser? What does it mean to have a Shir of Isser Hana? Achila we know is a Kazayit, right? What's the Shir in the Isser Hana? So here he quotes, let's put it this way, if I ask you, okay, don't look, okay, what should the Shir of the Isser Hana be? Or if, let's say you hold, not like the Rambam, that you get Malchus for Isser Hana also. What's the Shir? How much Hana? What? No, but...
It was a joke.
Okay.
You have to hold like the Rambam because it's difficult to quantify.
That's obviously cool.
It's a kazait v'kadei achilas paras worth. Like we said, v'tam ki ikar.
Oh, you said two interesting things which actually soter each other, but you said both possibilities in one sentence.
I said I think that I would hold by the Rambam.
Okay, good. So, but I said that's what I said.
Answer. And
yeah.
then if I was forced to answer the question, I would say, like the Tosafists said with Tam Ki Ikar, that it's a Kedei Achilas Pras worth, right? Is that what you said?
So you said it's a worth. When you say worth, you mean it's a monetary amount?
Well, that's what we said about Tam, because there wasn't a mashut. in the timekeeper. It was absurd there too. It was like how do you quantify time there?
But there was,
and we tried to quantify
but there's an
time
obvious
there
amount that you consume.
What?
But there's amount that you
Something
consume. You have to
you're
get kazayit.
But it was Tom and not mamashut. So like where as opposed to.
All right. So the question of how much you have to eat, but you have to eat kazayit min isur or the heta became usur, and you have a kazayit of isur now. But now I have a piece of basar b'chalav, right? Now I want to. How much hana do I need? All right. So one shita is kazayit. Let's keep it simple, right? That means I have a kazayit of basar b'chalav. Okay. And what might I use it for? I don't know. Shampoo, right? If it's liquefied, right? Or I might use it as a paperweight. I don't know what you would use basar b'chalav for. Okay. What?
That's what I was going to say.
You would sell it.
Okay.
Right, but you need a kazayit you need hana from a kazayit. So that's one day here. If you take a look, eino loke al hanaa, right? Ach l'shar poskim sheloke al hanaa, vaday eino loke al hanaa kiyim b'kazayit. Okay, you have to be nana from a kazayit. Okay. Va'ayim b'tshuvat Rabbi Akiva Eger shehevi raya misugya b'vakam daf mem aleph shor niskal. That's a sugya there. Dishiro b'hanaat pruta. That's what I said. I thought you said when you said worth, right? So the question is, how do you measure the hana'ah? Do you measure it according to what the shir achila is? You see where I'm going, right? Or do I say no? Achila we know is kazayit. We're not talking about achila. We're talking about hana'ah. That's a different isser. So now I can say, okay, so how do I measure hana? So you measure hana with a monetary shear. So shavat pruta. Shavat pruta, that's a shear of mammon, right? So if you have hana, which is worth shavat pruta, then you're chayav. According to those sheets, that you get malchus, right? So this obviously goes to that question. If you say the isra hana is an extension of the isra achila, so then it should be the same shear, just like the same way when we talked about it in terms of bishul. Whether what the shear for the bishul should be. So too, in terms of the hana, is it a kazayit or is it a shavat pruta? Okay? Now, it's very possible to say that there are different types of isurei hana, and that's what the Rambam is going to talk about. Okay? Some isurei hana may be extensions of achila, other isurei hana maybe have nothing to do with achila. The isur avodah zarah, for example. How do you know that avodah zarah is asur b'hana? If I bow down to a pesel, so the pesel becomes asur b'hana. What's the sheer hana that you have to be over, that you'd have to be nana? It's ridiculous to talk about in terms of kazayit. It's not an isra achila at all. It's lo yidbak b'yadcha me'uma min acherem. So what is a me'uma? So then you can say it's that's a shavat pruta. That's easy. But here it's a little more complicated because you have an isra achila in the picture. So you say you want to go with isra achila here and say it's a kazayit, or you want to go with isra hana that's not connected to achila, and then it's a shavat pruta. Okay, so that's one issue. Okay, there's another issue which then we'll look at the Rambam here. This was actually a shaila that really came up. It could, and actually, Bati asked me this shaila before we got married. She had a cat. And it was before Pesach, and she asked me, "What about is the cat food? If the cat food is chametz, so can I feed the cat on Pesach with chametz the cat food, right?" Okay, so I said, "Let me check the ingredients of the." So I took the can of cat food, and I forget about chametz on Pesach. It's basar b'chalav. It said milk and and meat. So then I tried to explain to her this Rambam in the Nifla, because this Rambam is really the question, because presumably the meat that they use in cat food or in dog food, even if it's basar b'chalav, the meat is not kosher meat. First of all, maybe it's even behemoth tmeya, right? Maybe they use horse meat and other types, but even if they're using beef, and sometimes they advertise it as beef, right? Presumably it's nevela. Right? And that is the question that the Rambam talks about here.
And this seems to also to be, tell me if there's an additional question, because one question that comes up very often for us is, students who want to work in trade restaurants over the summer. And I always thought it was usher. And after I prepared this class, I thought, no, it's not. Why should it be usher? There's, you're talking about nevela with cheese in any case, and there's really no reason why you can't work right quick in Mari's.
Well, there's an issue. There's an Isser D'Rabbanan Lasot Schora B'Nevelot U'Treifot. It's also to be a treif butcher, for example, right? That's an Isser D'Rabbanan.
Where is that?
Where does that appear? It's in the Gemara. I don't remember where. It's in Chulin. There's an Isser Lasot. It's Lasot Schora B'Nevelot U'Treifot. I'm not sure if somebody works for someone, whether that's also considered, or it's only for the owner, right? I'm not sure if that includes some. That means you can't be a waiter in a treif restaurant.
So
I'm not sure.
You're allowed to sell the nevela that's in your house.
Right, but the lasot schora, to make a living from nevela to the treifot, is an issur d'Rabbanan.
There's a difference between working in a restaurant and being a non-kosher butcher.
And what?
Being a non-kosher butcher.
Yeah, it could be.
So you happen to serve chicken or whatever it is, but it's not the only thing you're doing.
Well, there might be other issues. It depends what you do in the restaurant. If you're serving people, and if there are Jews there, you got lifnei iver issues. You have to think about it. It's an interesting question, right? But you were just looking in terms of the basar b'chalav, right? So let's see. This is the issue. Okay. So let's see the Rambam. V'yesh darim elu ele nikuda nifla'a na'ir aleha. Okay. Lefi shehi מפתח לעניינים אחרים נוסף למה שיש בה מדיוק העיון, והוא מן הידוע שבשר בחלב אסור בהנאה. והחלב דרך משל מותר בהנאה. ואם בישל החלב בחלב, מה טעם לא יחול איסור בשר בחלב על איסור חלב? V'uadin b'nevela. This is alluding to the Gemara in Daf Kuf Yud Gimel, which we saw, right? About Isur Chalal Isur. Yeah? But here, so they were talking about the Isur Bishul and the Isur Achila. Here, he's going to ask about, he's just interested in the Isur Achila, and he wants to know why you don't say Isur Chalal Isur, because the Isur Hana is an Isur Mosif. The Klal, in general, is that ein isur chalal isur. If you have something to asur already, you can't make it asur again unless the second isur adds either other objects in the isur. That's called isur kolel and includes more things, or it adds in the severity, or if it adds different activities which are asur. So if you have something which is only asur ba'achila, right, chelev or nevela, and you cook it with chalav, so why shouldn't it become basar b'chalav? Because chelev and nevela is mutar b'hana. It's only asur b'achila. And now, by basar b'chalav, you've made it asur b'hana. That's an isur mosif. L'cha'ora, that's an isur mosif. And you should say isur chalal isur. And the nafkamina is, of course, it was asur to eat before, but it should become asur b'hana as well, right? And that's where you would get to this, the question of the cat food and the question of working in a treif restaurant and creating the basar b'chalav, etc., even if the meat is nevela, right? Again, if the meat is behemoth tmeya, there's nothing to talk about, okay? Except according to the Bach, maybe it's an Isur D'Rabbanan, which Har'el pointed out to me. But on the Ekroni level, it's quoted in the Nosei Kelim, actually, in the beginning Pesai, okay? But on the Doraita level, there'd be nothing to talk about if it's a behemoth tmeya. But if it's beef, it's a behemoth tahora, and it's nevela, so then you have a question, why did you say Isur Chalal Isur? That's what the Rambam says, V'yoto Isur Mosif. כמו שאמרנו כאן, בחלב הקודשים, וחייבנו על אכילתו מעילה, מחמת שנוסף בו איסור הנאה. Because you have an animal, chelev is asur already, and then you makdish it. So now it becomes chelev of kodshim, and you ate it. So you're over another isur. Kodshim is asur b'hana. The chelev is only asur b'achila, so it's a mosif, so you're chayiv twice. You're chayiv for eating chelev, and you're chayiv me'ilah for eating kodshim. Yes? That's what the Mishnah says. That's the Mishnah that he's going on. So he says that that's because it's an isur mosif. The isur hana is an isur mosif to the isur achila. So why don't you say that by basar b'chalav as well? Okay? וחייבנו על אכילתו מעילה, מחמת שנוסף בו איסור הנאה. והתשובה לכך, שבשר בחלב לא נאסר בהנאה, אלא מחמת שאסר הכתוב אכילתו. לפי הכלל שביארנו, שכל שנאסר באכילה, נאסר ליהנות בו, עד שיפרוט לך הכתוב. You see what he's doing? Actually, it's the same fudging that the Gemara is doing. It's not his fault. Right? Rabbi Avo only said, anytime it says in the Torah, lo tochal, it means Isur Hana b'mashma, ad shifrot lecha katuv. The Gemara, one day in the Gemara, applies that to Basa B'chalav. Rabbi Avo himself is not the one who applies it to Basa B'chalav. Right? Remember that? It's just the Gemara does that. Okay? So he's following the Gemara. Right? But it's not Pashut. Right? So he says, but you see from here how he understands Rabbi Avo. Okay? Ve'ein bo shekol shene'asar b'achila ne'asar lehenot bo ad shifrot lecha katuv. Ve'ein bo pasuk ha'oser achilato u'pasuk ha'oser lehenot bo. They're not two separate isurim. They're derived from the fact that it says or that it is an isur achila. Okay? Ela shnei hadvarim yachad heim isur basa b'chalav. Basa b'chalav means zasa b'chila asa b'hana. But it's not two separate isurim. In other words, I don't have to say in other words, he's going to say it. V'kevan she'amarnu ein isur chal al isur ulefichach lo yachul isur basar b'chalav al isur nevela harei lo yehei isur hanaa harei lo yehei asur b'hanaa el yehei mutar b'hanaa v'ha'ochlo lo kem mishum nevela v'yarad isur basar b'chalav legamrei lefi shelo chal. What is he saying? He's saying that the isur hana is an extension of the isur achila. It's not a separate isur. In kodshim, it's a separate isur. You have an isur chelev, that's one isur, and now you have a new isur, kodshim, right? Where the isur to eat kodshim is not an isur achila per se. There's an isur me'ilah. By the way, what's the shear of me'ilah to be chayav karban? Anyone want to take a guess? It's a machlokas Rambam and Ravid whether it's a pruta or kazait, and that has to do with the nature of the isur me'ilah, whether you think it's an isur achila or an isur gezel mihekdesh. Okay, but it's a very similar question to what I have by Basa B'chalav. Okay, but here, so the Rambam is saying that the isur hana in kodshim is different than the isur hana of Basa B'chalav. In Basa B'chalav, the isur hana, because of the klal of Rabbi Avo, the isur hana is a, what would you say, an extension or is derived from the isur achila. And therefore, if the isur achila can't be chal, you have something that's already asur ba'achila. So the isur achila in chelev is less broad than the isur achila of Basa B'chalav. That's true. But fundamentally, they're both asur ba'achila. So since the isur achila of Basa B'chalav can't be chal on the isur achila of the nevela, memela, the isur hana, which is derived from the isur achila, is not chal. So it's not considered an isur mosif. Okay? But if the isur hana is of a different type, then isur hana can be considered an isur mosif. And that's the relationship between the isur of me'ilah in kodshim to the isur of achilat chelev. So me'ilah in kodshim is not an isur achila at all, according to the Rambam. Okay, so that's very, very important. He's right. This is a mafteach le'inyanim acherim. Right? The Rav loved it. The Rav made this Rambam famous. He called it the Nekuda Nefla of the Rambam. Okay, not everybody agrees to this though. Okay? This is quoted by Achronim here on Shulchan Aruch. One second. Here, where is it? It's in the Piskei Tshuva, Sif Katan Vav. We have other Achronim here. If you look actually in the Dagul Vava, that's an Od Behuda. Do you have Dagul? You have it? On Seif Gimel. Are you with me? Yeah?
What would you say?
It's the Dagul Miravava. V'chein chelev asur levashel b'chalav. And he says, min ha-Torah, v'lokal bishulo, aval ba'achila ein bo isur basar b'chalav, v'chol ze mevua b'Rambam, v'omnam imu asur b'hanaa eino mevua b'dvrei Rambam. Aval b'perush ha-Mishnayot, b'masechet Kritut, he quotes this, he says, Sham mevua sham b'dvrei Rambam she'eino asur b'hanaa ayin sham b'nekuda nifla'a shebi'er sham. Okay? So he says, he concludes, he can be somech on this. Because there's nobody that argues b'ferish. L'chein somech al zeh b'makom hefseid lo yafsid. Okay? So nothing else to feed the cat, right? You can rely on the Rambam and the Nekuda Nifla that since it's at most basar nevela, so there's no Isur Hana Basar B'chalav, because Isur Hana and Basar B'chalav is not considered Isur Mosif, and Ein Isur Halal Isur, so it's just an Isur Nevela, and it's mutter to feed Nevela. It's a pasuk in the Torah to give Nevela to your animals, right? So that's mutter. Okay? So that's what the Rambam would say. It's not clear that everybody agrees with this. In the Rashba, I don't want to get into the whole discussion, but here in Shar Gimel, Shar Dalet. What? No, it's a one-line thing. I'll just read it to you here. He says, let me just make sure I give you the correct reference. Shar Revi'i is Dinei Basar B'chalav V'Kchal. Shar Revi'i right, the first, right, Bayit Shlishi Shar Revi'i, okay? He says, it's on page, let me see, give you the reference. In the old pages, it's Daf Pei Aleph. In this edition, it's Daf Pei Hey. Okay? He says, "V'od the basar b'chalav isur mosifu." He holds basar b'chalav is an isur mosif. Okay, the isur hana is mosif. Okay, it's part of a whole cheshbon that he makes to understand the different Gemara. Okay, he says basar b'chalav is an isur mosif, and some of the Achronim feel that way also. If you look here in the Pesachei Tshuva, he talks about it also. Pesachei Tshuva, Ot Vav. He says, he quotes the Dagul Mirvava. Then he says, it's in the middle of the piece. Vayem Pri Megadim Pticha Shekatav Denaktinan De Asur Bahana Min HaTorah. Okay, so he's cholek since you don't pass him like the Nekuda Nifla. That was a Pri Megadim in the Pticha, which you can take a look at it for a second.
I mean, it seemed like the Ramah when I asked you that question.
What?
Where?
Where?
When you were
Not stoking the fire.
not stoking the fires.
Ah, right. Yes.
That seems to
Let me think for a second. There, it's talking about the Isur Bishul. There, it's talking about the Isur Bishul. And there, if you assume that the Isur Bishul is independent of the Isur Achila, you're okay. You say there's Mavashal Basar B'chalav, but it didn't create Basar B'chalav. That depends on the 4 dayot that we had in the Gemara there. So right, so there's about the Isur Bishul. It's not about the Isur Hana.
Meaning all you're worried about is stoking the fire is
That you're being right. You're going to be Mavashal Basar B'chalav. But whether you created Basar B'chalav, that depends on what we talked about last week. Whether it's possible to have an Isur Bishul without creating the Isur Achila, and hence without creating the Isur Hana. So that was a different dayot in the Gemara that we worked out. Okay? Right. Here is talking about the Isur Hana. So, and if you look in the Pri Megadim, it's down. Okay, it's about halfway through. The Dibra Matchil is Od, and here he says it. A second. Let me just find it. Yeah, the bot. If you have the printout. Okay, it's halfway through. Because in my volume, it's 2 big columns, and it's the very bottom of the first column. L'inyan chelev b'chalav. Okay.
Before or after he
What you read before.
Before. Vahini nagah chaticha chama. That
Yeah.
whatever. Before that. Not like way before it.
What did you say? Ode adaber kima?
Od adaber kimat rega. Right in that paragraph. For me, it's like 8-9 lines down. Ule inyan chelev b'chalav. I asur min Torah, o lav, right? Mashmut Aram perek tet machot asurot de'ein lo ke'al achila, shnayim. You don't get 2 malkiot. V'haya lo ke'al bishulo. Okay? U'meila de'asur, and then he says, u'meila de'asur b'hana, de'lo shayach ein isur chalal isur b'hana. He thinks it's an isur mosif. V'ayin, here it is. V'ayin b'torat habayit ha'aroch. Pei aleph amid aleph. That's what I just read to you. The katav dahava mosif. Right, that it is considered isur mosif. So after dvarav tzarich yun sham. Okay, we didn't get to those sugim. Mikol makom naktinan, but he concludes the asur b'hana'ah min haTorah. V'af shemidivrei Rambam b'perish mishnayot b'kritut, etc. We don't hold that way. Okay? Mashma kevan shelo chal isur achila hu hadin hana mikol makom lo shavkinan haonach mekomot mefurashot leisur mipnei zeh. All right, so he disagrees. Okay. So the Rambam lahalacha is not clear whether you would say that lakula. Knows if you have treif meat that's cooked with milk, whether it's asur b'hana, and again that's halacha l'maisa. If you have pet food or things like that. The thing is with the Rambam, you could accept the Rambam's principle, but disagree in Basa B'chalav. Because as I said, there's a fudging that's going on. What did Rabbi Avo say? Maybe if the Isser, I would say like this, if the Isser is formulated in terms of in the Torah with the words Achila, and there's no clause that excludes Hana, which means then it's Asur b'Hana also, that case, then Hana would not be considered an Isser Mosif. That's the principle that the Rambam says, and I can accept the principle, but I'll say that's only true. And as Rabbi Avo is not defining for me in general what is Achila. He's telling me what does the word Achila mean in the Torah. It's not the same thing. When the Torah uses the word Achila, it means Isser Hana. That's only if the Isser is formulated in terms of Achila. But you have sometimes the Isser, for instance, in Kilayim, is Pen Yukdash. It's the Lashon of Hekdesh. Right? Or Basa B'chalav, there's no Isser Achila. I don't know. Yom Kippur, right? Obviously, they're not talking about Isser Hefza, but you have places where things are usher to eat, but the Torah doesn't formulate them in terms of using the language of Achila. So when the Torah doesn't use the language of the Isser of Achila, so maybe you don't have the klal of Rabbi Avo. So I can accept the Rambam's principle and say, you're right. If the Hana it's very elegant. If the Hana is a derivative of the Achila, if the Isser Achila can't be Chal, then the Isser Hana can't be Chal, and that's why Hana is not considered Isser Mosif. But sometimes the Hana is separate from the Achila. When the Torah formulates the Isser not in terms of Achila. So there, Hana is an Isser Mosif. Right? So I would disagree with the Rambam's example, but I could accept him in principle. Okay. Okay. There's another thing. Okay, so I think okay. Is anything else about Isser Hana? No. Okay. All right, Poseidon. So we can stop here. Next week we'll do we'll do Bas V'chal D'Rabbanan, which comes up also in the beginning of Pei Zayin, and Peichet, which is the halacha of waiting and how long you wait and why you wait. Okay? Beseder.